In the quiet corners of history lie tales seldom told, forged by human resilience and defeat. And this is one such story. The historical records we now share traverse the river of time, revealing moments that changed the world. Let us embark on a journey to explore that ancient past, long forgotten yet still echoing in our present. Imagine if modern Germany had not been forged by monarchs or armies, but by those whom the Romans deemed barbarians. Before Berlin and emperors, the lands north of the Rhine were home to a multitude of tribes. They were fiercely independent, perpetually at war with one another. They united only against external threats. The Romans regarded them as a wild, chaotic people, yet acknowledged their cunning and strength. Through the rise and fall of empires, these tribes gradually transformed. They embraced new faiths, developed trade, and mastered novel forms of warfare. This forged a unique culture. When Charlemagne united them with cross and crown, he did not inaugurate a new epoch, but consolidated the fruits of centuries of conflict. It was chaos, conquest, and cultural fusion that forged these scattered tribes into the embryonic form of European power. Before Germany's borders and cities emerged, people lived here in harmony with nature's rhythms. In the distant Paleolithic era, small groups hunted reindeer and wild horses across northern plains. They migrated seasonally, traversing between frozen and thawed lands. Along riverbanks and woodlands, stone tools and small encampments remain. These relics reveal their migratory wisdom, collaborative skills and adaptive genius. This way of life shaped settlement patterns across the region for millennia. Following the glacial period's end as the land warmed and forests spread, around 5,500 BC new farming communities settled in fertile river valleys. They constructed longhouses from timber and clay, cultivated grains and raised livestock. This marked the transition from nomadic groups to settled villages. These farmers did not develop in isolation. Pottery and burial sites reveal their ideas drew from cultures across Europe. Trade and cultural exchange linked Central Europe to a broader network of new ideas. These settlements gradually evolved into Bronze Age societies. The Nebra sky disk discovered around 1600 BC offers a clear window into that world. This bronze disk, found in Saxony-Anhalt, features inlaid gold motifs of the sun, moon and stars. This ancient celestial map served to track seasons or conduct rituals. Its exquisite craftsmanship demonstrates local artisans' mastery of astronomy and metallurgy. The disk was not merely an object, it reveals how early societies intertwined practical knowledge with spiritual beliefs. Such artifacts suggest organised leadership and a shared worldview. By the Bronze Age, these communities were integrated into vast trade networks. They transported Baltic amber, Alpine copper ore and Cornish tin ore. These commodities circulated along rivers and forest paths crisscrossing the continent. Settlements flourished along trade routes, often situated at strategic junctions or near mineral deposits. Wealth fostered social stratification. Burial mounds and hill fort remains indicate an elite class controlling labour and resources. Though lacking written records, their craftsmanship, agriculture and rituals reveal a society marked by both cooperation and competition. Climate shifts between 1200 and 800 BC brought cold spells and poor harvests, forcing people to migrate and adapt. Within this changing world, the ancestors of the Germanic peoples began to form linguistic research, traces their origins to the northern Baltic and Scandinavian regions. From there they migrated gradually southwards into Central Europe. This was not a mass exodus, but a progressive dispersal of people, tools and dialects. They forged new identities while preserving ancient traditions. Sacred landscapes emerged. Holy springs, tree circles and burial grounds aligned with the stars. These sites reveal an increasingly rich spiritual life where religion and daily existence were seamlessly intertwined. 3,000-year-old bog bodies discovered in northern Germany offer a precious window into their world. Preserved hair, skin, and the last meal of the deceased suggest rituals or sacrifices linked to beliefs in nature and the supernatural. Every artifact, from polished axes to gold rings, records not merely an era, but the slow shaping of culture, language, and identity. This laid the foundations for the later Germanic world. By 500 BC, numerous tribes inhabited the vast lands stretching from the Baltic coast to the upper Danube. Later termed Germans by Roman writers, tribes such as the Suebi-Cherushi Goths and Vandals spoke closely related languages. They shared warrior customs organised around familial bonds rather than centralised authority. Their societies revered loyalty and courage. Leadership was earned through personal prowess and wartime command. Small tribal groups governed through deliberation, while clan relations dictated justice and alliances. Agriculture, herding, and seasonal raids sustained these peoples scattered across wooded plains. Their rhythms ebbed and flowed with migration harvests and conflicts with neighbouring tribes. For centuries, oral legends and heroic epics perpetuated bloodline traditions and ideals. These formed the early threads of the Norse epic tradition. After the Roman Empire reached the frontier in the late 1st century BC, contact grew increasingly frequent, yet fraught with tension. To the Romans, the lands beyond the river were a chaotic borderland they termed Germania. Dense forests and marshes impeded Roman expansion. Merchants and soldiers came seeking slaves. Hides and amber Germanic tribes witnessing Roman discipline and wealth wavered between resistance and cooperation. Trade crossed the frontier as swiftly as hostility returned. Roman coins and pottery, buried deep within tribal heartlands, bore witness to trade and diplomacy beyond warfare. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in AD 9 shattered this fragile equilibrium. The Cherushi chieftain, later known as Arminius, led a tribal alliance against 3 Roman legions. Having once served Rome, Arminius understood its tactics intimately. He lured the enemy deep into narrow forest paths, launching a surprise assault under torrential rain, skillfully exploiting the terrain, ambushing and annihilating 20,000 Roman soldiers, thus ending Rome's ambitions to expand east of the river. The Roman Empire was shaken. Emperor Augustus abandoned plans to conquer Germania. Instead, fortresses and watchtowers were erected along the river. This frontier served both as a barrier and a link. For nearly 4 centuries, it defined the interaction between the empire and its northern neighbours. Roman fortresses like Cologne and Mainz gradually developed into towns gathering merchants, artists and soldiers from across the empire. Germanic envoys visited these outposts, sometimes swearing allegiance in exchange for gifts or land. Many young warriors joined Roman cohorts, learning weaponry tactics and even Latin vocabulary. This influence later shaped the military organisation of the early Middle Ages. Prolonged contact with Roman civilization imparted far more than military knowledge to the tribes. Legal custom systems of weights and measures and monetary systems were successively introduced. Cultural exchange persisted. Unabated Roman glassware, wine and decorative brooches flowed northward, traded for amber furs and captives. These exchanges did not dissolve tribal identity. Instead, they sharpened the contrast between the disciplined empire and the loosely allied Germanic world. This contrast fostered a sense of independence perpetuated through legend. Oral storytellers extolled leaders who resisted Rome. These memories and myths evolved centuries later into epics like the Nibelungenlied. Details recorded by Roman writers reveal the human dimension of this encounter. For instance, warriors would insert goose feathers into their hair, believing the spirit of the bird would grant them speed in battle. To Roman writers, such beliefs seemed absurd, yet they reflected a worldview where courage was intimately linked to the natural world. By the 4th century AD, the frontier defences had weakened trade, became increasingly frequent. Intermarriage proliferated, and the mercenary system blurred the distinction between Roman and Germanic soldiers. Yet both sides' sense of identity grew ever more entrenched through their opposition. The empire regarded the northern frontier as an impassable boundary. Tribes beyond the border drew strength from resistance and self-rule. This protracted confrontation forged a shared historical thread, shaping the lands destined to become the heart of medieval Germany. By the late 4th century, the Roman Empire began to disintegrate under dual pressure from within and without. Provinces long reliant on imperial defence severed ties, clearing space for new peoples to settle across the wooded plains of Central and Northern Europe. Germanic tribes along the Roman frontier began migrating southwest. Some driven by hunger and cold, others drawn by land and stability. Rome's weakening power created a vacuum across Europe. Entire peoples moved seeking refuge and identity. This migration was not a single invasion, but multiple movements spanning generations. Among them, the most renowned were the Visigoths. They had been granted permission by Rome to settle along the Danube, mistreated by imperial officials. They rose in revolt. Their leader Alaric marched his army into Italy, demanding Rome honour its pledge to recognise his status and pay ransom. When diplomacy failed, his forces advanced directly upon the ancient capital. In 410 AD, the Visigoths captured and sacked the city of Rome. This marked the first fall of Rome to foreign hands in nearly 8 centuries. For the ancient world, this catastrophe symbolised the spiritual collapse of the empire far beyond mere material ruin. Even as the city burned, the Visigoths saw themselves not as destroyers, but as inheritors who would safeguard the legacy in a new form further east. The Ostrogoths, close kin to the Visigoths, faced their own existential pressures. They had initially been ruled by the Huns. These nomadic warriors hailing from the Eurasian steppes united various tribes under Attila's command. The Huns' arrival triggered a chain reaction. Germanic tribes fled westward into Roman territory, some seeking refuge, others exploiting the collapse of imperial defences. The Vandals traversed Gaul into Spain, ultimately reaching North Africa. They established kingdoms along the ancient Roman grain routes. Later the Lombards descended into Italy, their name preserved in the region still known as Lombardy today. These migrations were not chaotic wanderings. Rather, they were meticulously planned operations by tribal chieftains during the empire's decline, aimed at securing land grain and legitimacy for rule. As power shifted from distant emperors to local warlords, ancient tribal councils gradually gave way to hereditary monarchies. Warriors no longer pledged allegiance to an abstract empire, but to individuals who could grant land and protection. The new rulers gradually emulated the Roman model. They retained useful aspects of Roman law, levied taxes and supported the church to consolidate their rule. Latin vocabulary permeated Germanic dialects. Roman styles appeared in weaponry and jewellery. Christianity spread along trade and migration routes. The outcome was not the destruction of Roman civilization, but its metamorphosis. The fusion of Roman and Germanic traditions redrew Europe's cultural map. Blending Latin script with northern customs, personal rule with divine kingship. In 476 AD, the Germanic commander Odoacer deposed the infant Emperor Romulus Augustulus. With scarcely any resistance, Rome lacked the strength to command its own armies. Odoacer dispatched the imperial regalia to Constantinople, declaring the Roman world needed but one emperor. This act reflected political realism rather than rebellion. The Western Roman Empire ended, yet the foundations of medieval order had already taken root. The new world that emerged no longer called itself Roman, yet its core still beat with Roman rhythms. Now, leading these lands were peoples who had once roamed beyond the frontier. In the centuries following Rome's collapse, a new force emerged among the Germanic tribes of Western Europe, the Franks. Initially a loose confederation of tribes scattered along river courses, they grew steadily under Merovingian rule. Early rulers fused ancient tribal customs with Roman traditions, forging a governance system suited to the post-Roman era. It was upon this soil that a figure destined to define a new chapter in European history emerged: Clovis. 1. This monarch, who reigned from 481 to 511, unified the fragmented Frankish tribes through warfare, marriage alliances and diplomacy. He defeated rival kingdoms in Gaul, bringing both Germanic and Roman peoples under his banner. His most momentous decision, however, was not made on the battlefield, but in matters of faith: his conversion to Christianity. While most Germanic rulers adhered to pagan traditions or Arian Christianity, Clovis embraced Catholicism. This choice forged an alliance with the Roman Church. This union established the legitimacy of his kingship among Roman subjects and secured the support of clergy who recognized him as a defender of Orthodox faith. In return, the Church gained a protector who could uphold Christian unity across a fragmented realm. Clovis's baptism was not merely a personal event. It marked the first enduring partnership between Western European kingdoms and the papacy. This relationship would shape the political landscape for centuries. Following Clovis, the Merovingian dynasty endured. Yet with each generation, real power gradually shifted from the kings to chief officials such as the mayors of the palace. The rise of the Carolingian family in particular overshadowed the monarchs. It began with Charles Martel, who halted the advance of Islamic forces into Gaul at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD. The family steadily expanded its influence across Frankish lands. Descendants of Martel accumulated power until his son Pepin the Short formally ascended the throne. With papal backing, by deposing the last Merovingian king, Pepin transformed royal authority into a legitimate alliance with the Church, tying divine grace to political success. His son Charlemagne inherited his father's covenant and ambitions. Ruling from 768 to 814, this great emperor became one of Europe's most formidable sovereigns. Through years of conquest, he extended the Frankish realm into Lombardy, Saxony, and parts of present-day Austria and Hungary. His conquests extended beyond mere occupation to establish effective governance. He divided his lands into regions governed by counts who reported to royal inspectors. This ensured effective control over vast territories. Education and law formed the core of his governance. Charlemagne promoted literacy among clergy and officials. He funded the copying of classical texts and standardized Latin script for schools and monasteries. This intellectual revival, later termed the Carolingian Renaissance, rescued scientific, philosophical and theological works from potential oblivion. In the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne emperor in Rome. This restored the imperial title to the West after over 3 centuries of absence. The act carried profound significance, forging Roman authority, Christian faith and Germanic leadership into a unified vision of order. His empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Danube, marking both the continuation of Roman civilization and the birth of medieval Europe. Historical accounts describe Charlemagne as imposing, standing approximately 6 feet 3 inches tall, around 190 meters, his stature complementing his political influence. His reign not only expanded territories but fundamentally reshaped the nature of monarchical power. This laid the groundwork for the eventual emergence of the Holy Roman Empire. Following Charlemagne's death, the empire began to disintegrate as his descendants fought to maintain unity. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD formalized the division. His grandsons partitioned the kingdom into 3 parts: West Francia, Middle Francia, and East Francia. This division had far-reaching consequences, establishing the cultural boundaries that would later define modern France and Germany. East Francia fell to Louis the German. Its territory stretched from the Rhine to the Elbe, comprising principalities where lords spoke different dialects, yet shared allegiance to the Carolingian dynasty. The kingdom lacked a unified capital and relied instead on the bargaining loyalty between rulers and nobles, a fragile arrangement sustained through constant adaptation. The following decades were marked by fragmentation and threats. Local dukes exploited the weakening royal authority to expand their power. The Bavarians, Swabians, and Saxons governed their territories with near autonomy. The king depended on their strength to raise armies and govern the realm. External pressures persisted relentlessly to the east. The Magyars, commanding elite mounted archers, raided the Bavarian and Thuringian plains with frequency. To the north, Viking fleets invaded via the rivers, capturing towns and monasteries. Slavic tribes migrated ceaselessly from the forested lands beyond the Elbe. In this realm of shifting alliances and perpetual defence, unity seemed a distant dream. Yet amidst the turmoil, the monarchy quietly evolved. The rulers of East Francia learned to replace absolute rule with patronage and protection. By the dawn of the 10th century, the Carolingian bloodline in Germany was waning. The nobility chose a new leader from the rising Saxon dynasty. Henry the Fowler, so named for his passion for falconry, ascended the throne in 919. Unlike his predecessors, Henry did not demand feudal submission from the nobility. He acknowledged their power, exchanging military support for their allegiance. Through treaties and defensive actions, he stabilized East Francia and established a system of fortified towns to repel invasions. His rule restored confidence among the Germanic states. Victories over the Magyars reinforced his image as defender of the Christian world's frontier. Under Henry's rule, the concept of an independent German kingdom began to take shape. This was not a revival of the Roman Empire, but a realm forged from practical necessity and resolute will. When Otto ascended the throne in 936, he inherited a fragile unity which he moulded into an empire. Through his statesmanship, Otto consolidated the lands of the nobles by appointing trusted relatives and ecclesiastical figures to key positions. This strategy intertwined spiritual authority with political control. In 955, his forces confronted the Magyars near Augsburg at the Battle of Lechfeld. This decisive victory ended decades of plunder ravaging Central Europe, establishing Otto as a guardian of peace and order. His influence extended from East Francia to Italy. By intervening in papal disputes, he gained sway over the church itself. In 962, Pope John XIV crowned Otto in Rome, reviving the imperial title in the West. This coronation marked the birth of the Holy Roman Empire. This polity linked the German kingship with the Roman legacy and the role of Christian protector. Otto was henceforth honoured as the Church's patron, a role subsequent emperors were required to perpetuate the crown specially crafted for this coronation, later known as the imperial crown of the Holy Roman Empire. Remained in use for over 8 centuries, it symbolised the continuity of power from medieval kings to modern emperors. By the end of the 10th century, the Holy Roman Empire was no longer a single state but a network of allegiances among emperors, dukes, bishops and nobles. Power flowed through personal bonds rather than centralised governance. This system, termed feudalism, rested upon the equilibrium of service and protection. The emperor granted local rulers fiefs and privileges, while the latter pledged military service and allegiance. Yet, in practice, these commitments often shifted with changing circumstances. Power depended on transaction favours and familial bonds. Local dukes maintained independent courts, raised armies, and minted coins, while bishops administered territories rivaling those of nobles. The empire spanned most of Central Europe, held together not by law, but by a shared yearning for stability and divine order. The Ottonian dynasty, beginning with Otto the Great, dominated the 10th and early 11th centuries. Its rulers continued the policy of governing through the church, appointing bishops and abbots loyal to the crown rather than hereditary families. This system strengthened imperial power, but also bound its fate inextricably to the church. By the Salian dynasty in the 11th century, this equilibrium began to unravel as the papacy reasserted its independence. Conflict over episcopal appointments intensified, a dispute that would define medieval Europe. This crisis culminated in the investiture controversy between Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII. Both claimed authority to confer the symbolic power of office upon church officials. For the emperor, the right to appoint was vital to maintaining political unity.
For the Pope, it was a matter of defending spiritual purity against secular influence. When Gregory excommunicated Henry, the emperor's authority crumbled overnight. Nobles rose in rebellion, bishops withdrew their support, and his rule teetered on the brink of collapse. In January 1077, Henry trekked across the Alps seeking forgiveness. At Canosse, in northern Italy, he waited barefoot in the snow outside the papal fortress for 3 days before receiving absolution. This event became a symbolic image of the medieval struggle between secular and divine power. Humiliation for peace. For decades thereafter, emperors continually wrestled for dominance with both ecclesiastical and aristocratic forces. By the 12th century, Frederick I, dubbed the Redbeard, sought to restore imperial majesty. Following his coronation in 1155, he launched vigorous campaigns in Italy while implementing domestic administrative reforms. He enacted decrees strengthening royal justice, confirmed the autonomy of certain cities, and employed symbolic rituals to assert continuity with ancient Rome. His reign rekindled visions of a unified empire. Though political reality remained fragmented, Frederick's demise during the Third Crusade in 1191 only deepened his legendary status. Later folklore claimed he never truly perished, but laid dormant within a mountain, his red beard perpetually growing, awaiting the day Germany would need him once more. Meanwhile, the empire's internal landscape grew increasingly complex. Feudal lords, abbots, and free cities successively gained autonomy, transforming Germany into a mosaic of small states. Stone castles dotted the landscape like stars, symbols of power and defense. Knight orders emerged, blending monastic discipline with military duty. Thus sprouted the unique Germanic knightly culture, extolling loyalty, honor, and devotion within a moral framework shaped by Christian ideals. Centuries of power struggles forged an empire resilient yet fractured. This realm held together more by tradition than command. By the 13th century, Germany's center of power no longer resided solely within castles or palaces. The drivers of wealth had shifted from noble knights to towns along coastal rivers. Merchants, artisans, and shipowners supplanted knights as the core of economic power. Trade became the new benchmark of stability, as cities recognized that cross-regional cooperation yielded greater rewards than allegiance to distant monarch. Thus arose the Hanseatic League, uniting over 200 trading cities to dominate Nordic commerce from the Baltic to the North Sea. At its zenith, this alliance forged close ties between Lübeck, Hamburg, Bremen, Danzig, Riga, and Novgorod, establishing a mutual defense and governance legal framework. The alliance originated from the city merchants spontaneously uniting to jointly resist pirate incursions and the oppressive taxes of local lords. Lübeck occupied a central position. Its strategic Baltic Sea location made it a natural hub for routes to Scandinavia, the Low Countries, and Western Russia. Uniform weights, measures, and contract standards between cities enabled trade to function smoothly despite linguistic and monetary differences. These practical mechanisms gradually evolved into a robust institution with a parliament, diplomatic missions, and an armed fleet, though lacking a ruler. The Hanseatic League functioned like an independent state. Member city minor states retained autonomy, but adhered to common policies concerning the League's security or interest. Its economic influence was profound. German merchants transported Lumbic salt, Prussian timber and furs, Baltic coastal grain, and Saxon and Bohemian metal goods to the north. In return, they brought silk, wine, and spices from southern markets. By controlling port warehouses in London, Bruges, and Bergen, they established a trading empire, linking the frozen Baltic to the warm Mediterranean. Alliance merchants sailed in convoy fleets and maintained patrols to deter pirates, preserving enduring peace along trade routes. Should any kingdom threaten their privileges, the League could impose economic blockades or dispatch fleets to enforce agreements. Their influence was so great that monarchs preferred negotiation over the risks of war. Within the cities, money and organization transformed daily life. Towns purchased legal freedoms from feudal lords, governing themselves through elected councils. Powerful guilds regulated production, wages, and apprenticeships. Wealth reshaped the urban skyline. Black miners built Gothic churches and saw-inspired warehouses encircled broad market squares, embodying a community pride that saw trade as a shared pursuit of stability. Literacy became widespread. Schools proliferated, and a merchant class neither noble nor peasant emerged as the backbone of a new, self-minus assured urban world. Yet by the late 15th century, the world beyond the League's borders began to shift. The rise of powerful monarchies in Denmark, Sweden, and Poland curtailed the League's freedom, while new Atlantic trade routes shifted commerce towards Portugal and Spain. Despite the League's waning dominance, its member cities retained their prosperity and independence. Their legal systems, architectural styles, and municipal institutions endured longer than the alliance that once bound them. The Hanseatic experience transformed medieval Germany from a realm of feudal estates into a confident confederation of cities. These communities were defined not by rulers, but by commercial enterprise. At the dawn of the 16th century, the German states of the Holy Roman Empire stood at a crossroads of transformation. Wealth from trade and mining fostered powerful cities and an educated populace. Yet much of this capital still flowed to Rome through church taxes and indulgences. Many believers detested this trade, and forgiveness save promise of spiritual reward for monetary payment. The stark contrast between clerical opulence and lay poverty fueled Reformer scholars' debates over whether the church had abandoned its founding purpose. The printing press enabled mass reproduction of classical and religious texts, boosting literacy and fostering a habit of questioning authority. In workshops and taverns, pamphlets denouncing ecclesiastical moral decays circulated or were recited aloud. Calls for reform preceded open rebellion, yet suffered from a lack of unifying banner. That banner belonged to Martin Luther, monk and professor of theology at Wittenberg University. In October 1517, he challenged the sale of indulgences by publishing his 90-5 Theses. This set of arguments was intended to provoke discussion rather than incite rebellion. He asserted that salvation stemmed from faith, not indulgences. Posting the Theses on the door of Wittenberg Castle Church was an ordinary academic act, but the timing and context turned it into a flashpoint. Within weeks, printed copies circulated throughout the German states. Printers, sensing commercial opportunity, mass miners produced them for reform miners' hungry populace. New technology transformed what might have been a local dispute into a continent miner spanning debate, fusing moral indignation with intellectual curiosity. Over the following years, Luther engaged in ongoing debates with theologians and papal envoys. His writings, translated from Latin into vernacular German, became accessible to urban intellectuals and rural clergy alike. He asserted that every believer could study the Bible directly, without clerical mediation. In 1521, conflict culminated at the Diet of Worms, where Holy Roman Emperor Charles V demanded Luther recant his assertion. He refused, declaring he stand, "I can do no other." This defiance made him a symbol of conscience triumphing over obedience. Though hunted, he found refuge in Wartburg Castle under the protection of Frederick the Wise, Elector of Saxony. During his seclusion, Luther translated the New Testament into German. This work, written in vernacular language, not only advanced the standard-day sonates of German, but also enabled ordinary readers to interpret the Bible independently. This transformation spread like wildfire. Numerous German princes adopted Lutheran doctrine, motivated both by faith and by its potential to free them from the dual constraints of the emperor and the pope. Monasteries were dissolved, church lands confiscated, and new state churches under local control emerged successively. Yet reform also stood in rest. Radical factions, inspired by the ideal of spiritual equality, demanded social transformation. Between 1524 and 1525, the Peasants' War swept across vast swaths of southwestern Germany. Before the nobles' armies could suppress it, the conflict had left towns and villages in ruins. More radical sects, like the Anabaptists, rejected both church and crown, filling rulers with equal dread of heresy and anarchy. To reconcile faith and order, negotiations commenced among all parties. The 1555 Peace of Augsburg ended decades of turmoil. Through the principle of the prince's religion, is his own each ruler could choose the religion for his domain. Though permitting coexistence, this agreement deepened divisions, creating independent religious states within the empire. Yet the movement's impact extended far beyond religious schism. Through printing, education, and translation, it awakened a new consciousness of individual spiritual responsibility and national discord. Germany transformed from a medieval kingdom of submissive faith into a community of clashing ideas, led by a monk who reshaped the era with his pen. By the early 17th century, the Holy Roman Empire had become a fragmented collection of territories, held together more by historical inertia and cohesion. The 1555 Peace of Augsburg permitted rulers to choose Catholicism or Lutheranism for their territory, temporarily ending religious conflict. Yet the agreement left deep fissures. Calvinism, already spreading across German and Dutch territories, remained unrecognized. Habsburg emperors sought to revive Catholic influence, while Protestant rulers prepared for confrontation. Political ambition intensified the divisions, transforming the empire into a powder keg of religious and territorial disputes. In 1618, Prague, the capital of Bohemia, became the feud. Protestant nobles confronted imperial officials of the Catholic king to defend their rights. The assembly ultimately erupted into violent conflict. They seized two of the king's attendants and hurled them from a high window of Prague Castle. Both men miraculously survived, an event both sides interpreted as a divine omen. This defenestration of Prague ignited a rebellion that swiftly engulfed Bohemia and neighboring regions, marking the beginning of one of Europe's most devastating conflicts, the 30 Years' War. Initially, the war was merely local uprisings against imperial rule. Bohemian forces elected a Protestant king to oppose the Catholic armies loyal to Emperor Ferdinand II. Early victories by Catholic forces seemed to crush the rebellion, yet the flames of war persisted. Lutheran and Calvinist princes in northern Germany began uniting their forces. The Protestant cause soon gained powerful allies beyond the empire's borders. Denmark's entry into the conflict in the 1622 transformed the struggle into an international war. Despite Denmark's defeat, the arrival of new combatants ensured the conflict's relentless expansion. In 1630, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden joined the fray from the north. This reformer of military tactics and shrewd strategist reorganized his forces around principles of mobility and concentrated firepower. His adoption of light artillery and coordinated infantry operations fundamentally transformed warfare. His forces swept through Germany, routing imperial armies and seemingly reversing Catholic dominance. Though Gustavus Adolphus fell as a Protestant martyr at the Battle of Lutzen in 1642, the system he established perpetuated his legacy. As the conflict dragged on, religious strife became subsumed within a broader struggle. France, a Catholic kingdom, shifted allegiance to the Protestant camp to weaken its Habsburg rival. Fearing imperial expansion, Spain entered the war to safeguard dynastic ties with Austrian-German territories. Nations chose sides driven by survival, not faith. Towns changed hands repeatedly. Armies plundered civilian property, leaving famine and plague in their wake. Historians recorded entire regions reduced to ruins. Germany's population dwindled by nearly a third, evidenced by scorched villages, desolate churches, and deserted trade routes. When war-minus weariness finally compelled peace, European representatives convened in Munster and Osnabrück, Westphalia. Negotiations persisted from 1643 to 1648. Amid multilingual deliberations, couriers shuttled in ceremonial protocols were devised to prevent disputes from derailing talks. The resulting peace of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War, redrew borders, and recognized the sovereignty of individual principalities. It declared that princes could rule independently without interference from the emperor or the pope. This agreement weakened the power of the Holy Roman Empire, transforming it into a confederation of semi-minus independent states. The diplomatic conventions established by the treaty negotiators remained in use for centuries thereafter. This 5-year negotiation process marked humanity's first genuine attempt to balance power through diplomacy rather than conquest. It shaped the political order that would define Europe's future. In the decades following the signing of the Peace of Westphalia, the German territories fragmented into hundreds of principalities, bishoprics, and free cities. Each domain guarded its own laws, armies, and taxation, slowly rebuilding amidst the ruins of war. River trade resumed. Old fortresses were patched with new walls, and town markets flourished once more. Yet the Holy Roman Empire had by this time largely become a symbolic entity. Real power lay with local princes, whose dynasty sought survival through shrewd diplomacy and military might. Amidst this fragmented landscape, one state began its ascent, Brandenburg minus Prussia, situated where the North Sea meets the Polish plains. It lacked natural barriers, yet its rulers compensated through iron discipline and farm-sited planning. The Hohenzollern dynasty, ruling Brandenburg since the 15th century, recognized that this geographical position held both peril and opportunity. By 1640, when Frederick William ascended the throne, the territory lay ravaged by foreign armies, its debts towering. This monarch, later hailed as the Great Elector, embarked on reconstruction not through grand gestures but meticulous organization. He reformed taxation, centralized administration, and appointed professional officials loyal to the crown rather than local lords. His policies forged a compact standing army sustained by fiscal stability rather than mercenary contracts. Soldiers trained year-round veterans transitioned into civil service, imbuing civilian life with military discipline. Though geographically isolated, the state compensated for territorial limitations through unity. Frederick William further governed with tolerance. The capital, Berlin, welcomed Huguenot refugees expelled from France. They contributed craftsmanship, trade networks, and wealth, aiding economic reconstruction. The Elector's policy of religious freedom also benefited Dutch, Polish, and Jewish immigrants. Their skills revitalized architecture and commerce. The impoverished populace, scattered after the war, found renewed vitality under a government that promised security in exchange for discipline. By Frederick William's death in 1688, Brandenburg minus Prussia had risen to become a regional power, possessing one of Europe's most reliable armies. His successors built upon this foundation. The army doubled in size, training manuals established, standards of obedience. The administrative system meticulously recorded every grain of corn and every musket. The House of Hohenzollern enshrined efficiency as tradition, merging military discipline with social order. Prussian rates punctuality, frugality, reverence for hierarchy took root during this era. Berlin evolved from a modest fortified town into an orderly capital teeming with civil servants, scholars, and artisans. Its layout mirrored the state that forged its metrical, utilitarian, restrained. The Junkers, as landed gentry, formed the backbone of this system. They supplied officers for the army and held positions within the bureaucracy in exchange for control over their rural estates. Through this pact, aristocratic privilege aligned with national objectives, both curbing rebellion and reinforcing the class structure. Beyond Prussia, the principalities pursued their own paths. Saxony flourished through manufacturing and the arts. Bavaria prospered through loyalty to the Church. Hanover sought equilibrium between Europe and Britain. Yet none could rival the rise of Prussia's military machine. By the early 18th century, foreign monarchs paid to hire Prussian legions for their wars. This early form of military outsourcing transformed strict discipline into economic gain. As Habsburg Austria strengthened its domestic forces, the contest for leadership in the German minor-speaking world intensified. This rivalry gave rise to two power centers, Vienna representing tradition, Berlin embodying ambition. A century after the Treaty of Westphalia, the balance of power in Central Europe had been reshaped. Prussia stood poised to redefine the very meaning of Germany. In 1740, the 20-8-year-old Prince Frederick I ascended the Prussian throne. He set about transforming this minor northern kingdom into a power that commanded Europe's respect. During his 40-6-year reign, Prussia became renowned not only for its precision engineered armies, but also for the wisdom of its monarch. Frederick faced war immediately upon accession. Within months of his succession, he became embroiled in the War of the Austrian Succession, seizing Silesia from Austria. This audacious move stunned every court in Europe. The campaign demonstrated his extraordinary strategic insight. Treating the battlefield as a chessboard, he eschewed numerical superiority, relying instead on discipline, speed, and mobility to counter larger, wealthier armies. When the 7 Years' War erupted in 1756, Prussia stood alone against an alliance of Austria, France, and Russia. Throughout the protracted conflict, Frederick personally commanded from the front lines, often directing operations within musket range. Despite heavy casualties, his forces held their ground. Through meticulous organization, relentless training, and near-mathematical mastery of battlefield timing, he miraculously preserved Prussia's borders. These campaigns earned him the title the Great, yet they also left the nation exhausted and deeply indebted. But it was precisely this resilience that earned the tiny kingdom, sandwiched between great powers, a new-found respect. Frederick's true extraordinary nature lay not solely in warfare. Though seated at the pinnacle of absolute power, he practiced Enlightenment ideals, a paradox contemporary thinkers termed enlightened despotism. He championed religious tolerance, streamlined the legal system, and reformed government mechanisms to prioritize merit over lineage. Schools flourished under his rule, while the bureaucracy became renowned for efficiency and integrity. Frederick viewed governance as a moral imperative, declaring that monarchs existed to serve the state, not the other way round. In an era when most monarchs regarded territory as private property, this stance was truly exceptional. Throughout his life, Frederick engaged in dialogue with Europe's greatest intellectuals, most famously with Voltaire. Their extensive correspondence, compiled into volumes, reveals a shared pursuit of reason, literature, and liberty, though Frederick's sharp wit and controlling nature often strained their friendship. And though he admired philosophy, he distrusted idealism. He favored rational reform over revolution. In his view, an orderly bureaucracy guided by clear reason could create far greater value for humanity than political passion could ever achieve. His triumphs elevated Prussia to the ranks of recognized great powers, rivaling Austria in the German world. Prussian soldiers, renowned for their discipline, became the benchmark of military prowess, while Berlin flourished as a cultural hub for thought, science, and music. Frederick himself composed flutes and otters, and the court maintained a permanent orchestra whose music never ceased, even in times of war. During his seclusion at Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam, he personally designed gardens and buildings, revealing his pursuit of balance and refinement. This demeanor perfectly complemented his philosophical ideals of rational order. Setting an example himself, he dressed plainly and spent his days and nights poring over reports, correspondence, and military mail. Though welcoming to thinkers, he demanded absolute obedience, applying to himself the same rigor as to others. Legend holds he survived multiple assassination attempts, returning to his study days later to compose music, as if to prove discipline could master fate. Through more reform and intellect, Frederick forged a state embodying both military precision and philosophical reflection. This legacy would guide the German states into the future. The outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789 began to erode the foundations of European monarchies. Ideals of liberty, equality, and civic rights spread like shockwaves, threatening every crowned head across the continent. For the hundreds of loosely connected German principalities within the Holy Roman Empire, the revolutionary message brought both inspiration and alarm. Thinkers debated new political concepts, while rulers feared their subjects might emulate the quest for equal liberty. Witnessing the collapse of the French monarchy, the departure of its military commanders, and the emergence of a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte who promised stability through conquest, the German princes observed these events. At the turn of the century, Napoleon seized power and forged the French Republic into a military machine capable of crushing Europe's most ancient dynasties. His ambition drove him eastward into Central Europe, where German states remained fragmented by Austria, Prussia, and myriad small principalities and bishoprics. At the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, Napoleon utterly routed the combined Austrian and Russian forces. The following year he marched upon Prussia, the European paragon once renowned for its iron discipline. At the Battle of Jena and Aristide in 1806, French forces routed the Prussians within days. This defeat shocked those who had once extolled Prussia's precision military system. Entire armies disintegrated, cities surrendered without a fight, and the formidable illusion built by Frederick the Great crumbled in the face of modern warfare. The German states that comprised the Holy Roman Empire began to disintegrate. The ancient political entity whose origins traced back to Charlemagne thus perished after nearly a millennium. Emperor Francis I relinquished the Holy Roman Imperial title in 1806, governing instead as Emperor of Austria. Napoleon filled the power vacuum, transforming the Rhine Confederation into a new Germanic alliance politically and militarily integrated with France. Through this, he reshaped the Central European landscape, abolishing feudal privileges, establishing legal equality, and implementing a secular bureaucratic system modeled on the Code Napoleon. For some rulers, these reforms represented a path to modernity. For others, they were merely for and control cloaked in the garb of progress. Prussia's humiliation compelled it to confront reality. Political leaders such as Baron von Stein and General Scharnhorst, initiated sweeping reform. They rebuilt the army on merit rather than birth, restructured the education system, and sought to cultivate a sense of civic duty beyond the aristocratic class. This spirit of reform permeated civilian life, abolishing serfdom and encouraging civic participation. Though these changes did not instantly restore Prussia's strength, they reshaped its character into a disciplined and resilient nation, laying the foundations for future revival. As Napoleon's empire pushed deep into Russia's heartland, his dominance began to wane. The disastrous invasion of 1812 diminished French influence and ignited a wave of resistance across Europe. In 1813, Prussia allied with former adversaries to launch what would become known as the War of Liberation. Volunteers, students, and veterans fought together under the black, red and gold flag, a banner that later symbolized German unification. The campaign culminated in Napoleon's defeat at Leipzig, with the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 bringing his reign to an end. At the Congress of Vienna convened after his downfall, diplomats from the great powers read Europe's map. The German states were reintegrated into the German Confederation, a conservative order designed to restore stability, yet unable to suppress the burgeoning spirit of nationalism. Having endured the trauma of 1806, Frederick William III, King of Prussia, decreed a 6-year ban on court balls, proclaiming no celebration shall be held until honor is restored. This symbolic mourning signified the national will to rebuild strength through perseverance and reform, not indulgence. From the ruins of the old empire emerged the foundations of a more unified German national identity. No longer bound by imperial tradition, it now rested upon nascent hope. Following Napoleon's defeat, European leaders convened in Vienna in 1815 to reconstruct post-war order. Negotiations gave birth to the German Confederation, an alliance of 30-9 states focused more on containment than unification. Austria dominated the Confederation, maintaining influence through diplomacy and tradition, while Prussia stood as a diligent contender within it. Though the Federal Diet convened in Frankfurt, its resolutions held little binding force. Member states retained sovereign independence, maintaining their own armies, fiscal systems, and legal frameworks. This arrangement restored superficial calm, yet beneath it, a new generation began reimagining Germany's future. Within universities and literary circles, nationalist and liberal ideas spread among students and writers. Their vision of Germany was unbound by royal contracts, united instead by culture, language, and shared purpose. The Carlsbad decrees and secret police sought to suppress gatherings, yet debates on constitutions and civil rights persisted in secret chambers. Romantic poets and historians conjured a heroic, unified past, though not historically accurate. It inspired the future. As censorship tightened, the divide between conservative rulers and idealistic youth widened. Reformers turned to pamphlets, periodicals, and classroom debates to disseminate their ideas. While politics stagnated, industry flourished in the Ruhr coal keeples and Silesian forges. The curtain rose on the Industrial Revolution. Small workshops evolved into factories, initially powered by water, then steam. Ironworks cast rails and locomotives, while novel chemical processes revolutionized textile dyeing. Towns expanded rapidly, absorbing peasants into crowded urban working classes who, though cramped, gained stable livelihoods and fresh social bonds. Steamboats navigated waterways, linking markets once days apart. By the 1832, chimneys and rail tracks crossed the German landscape, heralding the transition from agrarian tradition to the mechanical age. The most significant initiative was the 1834 Prussian miners led customs union. This system eliminated internal tariff barriers, unifying weights, measures, and taxation across most German states, excluding Austria. For merchants, This meant smoother trade routes and predictable costs. For Prussia, it became an instrument of influence, incorporating smaller states into its economic system even before political unification. The customs union's trade network fostered collaborative practices, laying the groundwork for eventual unification. Roads and railways extended along trade routes, while emerging industries flourished in hub regions. The manufacture of locomotives, tools, and armaments both strengthened the economy and fortified national defense. The cultural sphere equally teemed with vitality. The Romantic movement championed emotional expression and national heritage, giving rise to Beethoven's musical masterpieces and the later works of Schumann and Mendelssohn. The works of writers such as Goethe and Schiller circulated across the state, their themes of freedom and fate resonating in lecture halls and opera houses. Philosophers explored idealism and rationalism, intertwining intellectual life with questions of political identity. The flow of ideas transcended borders and bureaucracy, redefining the essence of being German. Yet modern life brought its own pains. Factory labor imposed long shifts and arduous conditions. Artisans feared machines would supplant their livelihoods. Cities struggled to resolve water and housing crises, while social rifts between landlords and workers deepened. Calls for representative government grew, uniting liberal reformers and radical thinkers in common cause. Students gathered singing political songs. Workers debated fairness and labor, while middle-class professionals drafted petitions for constitutional government. When the first long-distance railway opened between Nuremberg and Fürth in 1835, it was hailed as the marvel of the rails. Those 6 kilometers of track bore far greater significance. Industrial leaps, intellectual renewal, and surging waves of transformation propelled Germany forward at a pace far outstripping the ruler's ability to control it. By 1848, food shortages, rising unemployment, and demands for political reform ignited a wave of protests across the German states. From Berlin to Vienna, crowds poured into squares calling for national unity, freedom of the press, and representative government. Students and craftsmen marched side by side beneath the black, red and gold banners colors that had long symbolized the struggle for liberty. Monarchs who had long resisted reform were forced into dialogue to quell the unrest. Rulers of multiple kingdoms pledged to enact constitutions and release political prisoners. The call for German unification leapt from university lecture halls into street action for the first time. This popular tide gave birth to the Frankfurt Parliament, convened in May 1848. Nearly 600 delegates from across Germany gathered at St. Paul's Church to draft a constitution for a unified Germany, a realm governed by law rather than privilege. Most delegates were professors, lawyers, and writers erudite yet politically inexperienced. They engaged in endless debates over what form of government Germany should adopt and whether the imperial crown should belong to Austria or Prussia. The assembly brimmed with idealism and intellectual vigor, drafting a constitution that guaranteed civil liberties and parliamentary authority. Yet the parliament held no real power. The armies remained loyal to their respective monarchs. When street uprisings escalated into violent conflict, liberal leaders hesitated, unwilling to risk open confrontation. By 1849, the unification movement had collapsed. Austria and Prussia deployed force to disperse revolutionary committees and reclaim control. When Frankfurt deputies offered the imperial crown to the Prussian king, he refused. He rejected a title conferred by a people's assembly rather than princely authority. Hopes for peaceful unification were thus dashed. Many revolutionaries fled into exile. Though the attempt failed, it gave rise to a generation of thinkers and officers who became convinced that unification could not be achieved through debate alone. Force was necessary. In the years that followed, this lesson took root in Prussia. Through careful reform, the army and bureaucracy grew increasingly efficient. transforming the state into a model of industrial and administrative strength. Against this backdrop, Otto von Bismarck emerged. The shrewd diplomat transformed historical lessons into a governing strategy, first serving as Prussian minister and later as chancellor. Bismarck viewed unification as a pragmatic objective, advocating its achievement through iron and blood rather than sentiment or ideology. He understood that a meticulously planned war forged alliances and eliminated opponents more effectively than any speech. His unification plan unfolded through 3 decisive campaigns. In 1864, Prussia and Austria-Hungary jointly invaded Denmark, seizing the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein and declaring joint administration. 2 years later, Bismarck turned against Austria-Hungary in the Austria-Prussian War. This brief, yet decisive conflict expelled Austria-Hungary from German affairs, establishing Prussia as the political heart of northern Germany. In 1870, tensions with France culminated in the Franco-Prussian War. This conflict united the southern German states under Prussian leadership, unleashing a wave of national pride. When victory ended the fighting, unification was no longer a dream. The former resistant states now celebrated together. After defeating Austria, Bismarck exercised restraint, pursuing a strategy of lasting peace rather than fiery vengeance, cementing his status as Europe's power broker through meticulously orchestrated warfare and diplomatic maneuvering. The fragmented German states were brought onto the path of unification, preparing the ground for the proclamation of the new empire. In January 1871, within the resplendent Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia stood encircled by princes and generals as he received the crown symbolizing decades of struggle and triumph. The German states, once divided by conflicting allegiances and interests, were finally united under the imperial banner. This moment held a carefully orchestrated irony. The proclamation of the new German Empire occurred precisely at the zenith of Prussia's triumph in the Franco-Prussian War, solemnly declared upon French soil. Otto von Bismarck, architect of German unification, stood nearby in his plain military uniform, witnessing the resolution of the centuries-long contest for German leadership. As the new empire's inaugural chancellor, Bismarck's mission was to translate military triumph into political stability. He skillfully balanced the ambitions of reluctant states and principalities, maintaining Prussia's leadership through persuasion and containment rather than direct rule. Under his stewardship, the federal framework began to take shape. Local rulers retained territorial autonomy, yet ultimate authority resided with the emperor in Berlin and the imperial government. Bismarck systematically built a bureaucratic apparatus, emphasizing discipline, secrecy, and meticulous record-minus keeping. His governance embodied a conviction statecraft required strategy, not sentiment. His rare public utterance encapsulated this philosophy. The great issues of the age will not be resolved by speeches and votes, but by blood and steel. Concurrently, the empire entered a period of rapid expansion, witnessing transformative shifts in its economic landscape. Germany emerged as Europe's workshop. Coal from the Ruhr, steel from the Saar, machine-driven factories converting raw materials into finished goods. By the 1882, Germany led Europe in chemical research, precision instrumentation, and electrical engineering. Railways linked industrial hubs to seaports. New cities sprang up around mines and factories, and the flow of capital and labor fostered the middle classes defining modern life. The industrial transformation also reshaped daily existence. Workers lived in close-knit communities, their hours dictated by factory whistles rather than daylight, while an educational system paved the way for young people into technical roles. In foreign affairs, Bismarck pursued called Realpolitik, a carefully orchestrated network of treaties designed to contain the rise of hostile powers. He forged alliances with Austria-Hungary and Russia to secure Eastern peace, while diplomatically isolating France for nearly 2 decades. This web of commitments maintained a delicate equilibrium, allowing Germany to grow quietly beneath a veneer of caution. Yet domestically, Bismarck faced another struggle. His Kulturkampf campaign aimed to weaken the Catholic Church's political influence, seeking to place education and marriage administration under state control. Simultaneously, he introduced Europe's first social welfare measures, including health and accident insurance, to curb the growing socialist movement among factory workers. His policies combined pragmatism with control, using reform as a tool to secure loyalty rather than guarantee equality. Following Emperor Wilhelm II's dismissal of Bismarck in 1890, the empire entered a new phase. This young ruler abandoned cautious diplomacy in pursuit of grand ambitions. He expanded the navy to rival Britain, vied for colonies in Africa and the Pacific, and proclaimed Germany's destiny to wield global influence. Industrial prowess fueled military confidence, while patriotism permeated schools and newspapers. Yet beneath this confidence lay turbulent currents, intensifying class conflicts, escalating urban unrest, and the great powers set systems towards Germany's rise. On the eve of the 20th century, the empire stood at its zenith, affluent, widely educated, and militarily formidable, yet encircled by unease that heralded more violent struggles to come. The summer of 1914 began with a political crisis that ultimately spiraled into World War. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo ignited the alliance system, which had been biding its time. The Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia-Russia, intervened to defend its ally within days. Germany entered the conflict to support its Austrian partner. This chain reaction could not be halted. For many Germans, the war symbolized national unity and destiny. Crowds surged through Berlin's streets, jubilant in the belief that their swift, decisive campaign would prove Germany's might to the great powers. Kaiser Wilhelm II placed his hopes in the strategy meticulously planned by the General Staff over years. The Schlieffen Plan demanded a rapid advance through neutral Belgium, aiming to encircle and defeat France before Russian forces could fully mobilize eastwards. The plan depended on speed and precision, utilizing Germany's rail network for meticulously coordinated troop and supply movements. Early successes convinced the German army that this gamble might succeed. By late August 1914, German forces had advanced deep into Belgium and northern France. However, they encountered fierce resistance at the Marne, where Allied counterattacks forced a retreat, dashing hopes of a swift victory. Both sides entrenched themselves in the western front stretches, locking the hundreds of kilometers of front line from the English Channel coast to Switzerland in a stalemate. Life in the trenches became the defining experience of this war. Soldiers endured mud, vermin infestations, poison gas attacks, and the constant threat of artillery fire that could bury entire units in an instant. Attempts to break the deadlock resulted in devastating casualties. Machine guns and barbed wire rendered traditional assault suicidal, while poison gas transformed the very air into a weapon. The slaughter reached unprecedented levels during the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Each battle traded thousands of lives for mere hundreds of meters of ground. The front lines became laboratories for industrialized death, with factories churning out shells faster than troops could fire them. On the Eastern Front, German forces fared better against Russia, seizing vast territories and capturing millions of prisoners. Yet these victories did not bring peace. Britain's naval blockade plunged the Central Powers into shortages of food and raw materials. Imports of grain and medicines plummeted, and civilians began to feel the impact. Bread was rationed, coal was scarce in winter, and substitutes replaced everyday goods. Starvation riots erupted in major cities. When strikes became frequent, as factories struggled to maintain production. Patriotic fervor gradually faded into exhaustion. By 1917, Germany faced new challenges. America entered the war after repeated German submarine attacks on merchant ships, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. Then by 1918, the German army attempted a final offensive on the Western Front, only to fail due to the arrival of fresh American troops. With forces stretched thin and supplies dwindling, the German army began its retreat. Domestically, naval mutiny spread. Workers demanded peace, and trust in the Kaiser evaporated. In November, Wilhelm I abdicated and went into exile. The new government signed an armistice agreement to end hostilities. The following year, the Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh penalties, reparations, territorial cessions, and military restrictions. For many Germans, this felt less like peace and more like punishment. Soldiers returning from the front only learned of defeat upon receiving ceasefire orders, staring in disbelief as the once invincible army crumbled. Imperial pride dissolved into widespread despair as the nation lost its bearings amid the ruins of its first modern war. German democracy faltered at its first attempt. Following the emperor's abdication and the war's end in 1918, Weimar proclaimed the Republic. They inherited a nation war-weary, resource-depleted, and seething with defeatist resentment. Returning veterans faced unemployment and uncertainty, while strikes and street clashes tore cities apart into confrontations between left-wing radicals and right-wing nationalists. The parliamentary system established by the Weimar Constitution promised representation in civil rights, yet born under pressure, it lacked deep social roots. Many Germans viewed it as a stopgap rather than a new beginning. The Treaty of Versailles further impeded the path to reconstruction. Signed in 1919, the treaty attributed war guilt to Germany and imposed punitive reparations. Vast territories were ceded, colonies entirely lost, and the military reduced to a fraction of its former strength. The war guilt clause shamed the nation, becoming an enduring trauma in the public consciousness. The economic strain of reparations payments drained the treasury, while emerging political movements denounced the government for accepting such harsh terms. Paramilitary organizations proliferated, asserting the empire's collapse stemmed from domestic betrayal rather than battlefield defeat. Violence became the political norm. Political violence and economic collapse defined the republic's infancy. Hyperinflation in 1923 devoured savings, rendering wages worthless. Workers collected their pay twice daily to purchase goods before prices double. To restore order, a new currency and foreign loans brought fleeting stability, ushering in the so-called Golden Twenties. Berlin flourished with cabarets, modern art, and scientific progress. Yet wealth proved ephemeral. Chaotic memories lingered as dozens of parties continued to fragment the political landscape. When the global economy collapsed in 1929, these fissures widened anew. The worldwide economic crash of 1929 wiped out all gains. American loans that had stabilized Germany's economy were withdrawn. Factories closed. Unemployment soared past 6 million. Small businesses failed. Famine returned to urban areas. Disillusioned citizens abandoned traditional parties, turning instead to extremist forces. The National Socialist movement led by Adolf Hitler promised to create jobs, restore national pride, and end humiliation. His rallies drew packed crowds, and the modern propaganda machine shaped him into a figure of destiny. Many conservative leaders attempted to exploit his popularity for their own ends, unaware he had already firmly seized control of the movement. In January 1933, they invited Hitler to become Chancellor, unwittingly opening the door to dictatorship. Within months, the fragile republic born of hope crumbled under the weight of mutual suspicion and fear. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and dismantle the nation's democratic institutions within a year. The parliamentary system transformed into a one-party dictatorship under the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Through a mix of legal measures and coercive threats, opposition parties were banned, trade unions dissolved, and local government brought under central control. Hitler promptly assumed dual roles as Chancellor and President, wielding supreme authority as Führer. With the death of Paul von Hindenburg, the Weimar Republic, already teetering on the brink due to economic crisis and political turmoil, became a mere appendage to the emerging Nazi regime. This regime maintained popular allegiance through propaganda and public spectacle. Mass rallies in Nuremberg showcased unity and strength, while radio and newspapers relentlessly disseminated carefully orchestrated messages about discipline, purity, and national destiny. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels controlled all cultural output, ensuring it served the image of a reborn empire. Posters, films, and school curricula extolled loyalty to Hitler, branding dissent as treason. Fear underpinned the system. The secret state police, the Gestapo, monitored private conversations, inciting citizens to inform on one another and eliminate perceived or imagined enemies. Under the reorganization policy, all institutions, teachers, associations, youth clubs, professional societies were incorporated into the party's control apparatus. Persecution awaited anyone deemed to deviate from the regime's racial or political doctrines. From 1933, Jews were expelled from public office, stripped of citizenship, and barred from education and professional advancement. The 1935 Nuremberg laws formalized these restrictions, defining identity by blood rather than religion. Violence and propaganda worked hand in hand to isolate Jewish families from their neighborhoods. Rome are disabled persons, homosexuals, and political dissidents likewise became targets of systematic discrimination. By the late 1930s, Nazi policy shifted from exclusion to extermination. State institutions organized deportations, constructed concentration camps, and subsequently established extermination centers where millions perished. This catastrophe, known as the Holocaust, claimed the lives of 6 million Jews and countless others across occupied Europe. As domestic repression intensified, Hitler pursued an aggressive foreign policy, shattering the post-war international order. In 1936, German forces reoccupied the demilitarized Rhineland without encountering resistance, by annexing Austria through the Anschluss in 1938 and occupying Czechoslovakia a month later. Each action expanded both territory and confidence until the invasion of Poland in September 1939 drew Britain and France into war. German strategy relied on rapid, coordinated offensives, the Blitzkrieg using tanks, aircraft, and mechanized infantry to overwhelm opponents. This tactic proved successful in Poland, Norway, Denmark, and France. With most of Europe under German control by mid-1940, the tide slowly turned. The Battle of Britain exposed the limitations of air superiority. Following the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, the vast Eastern Front drained immense resources and lives. German forces advanced to Moscow for the first time, but winter's arrival and resistance halted their progress. The Battle of Stalingrad in 1940 signaled the ultimate collapse. With American entry into the war, Allied offensives accelerated, culminating in the breakthrough of the Normandy landings in 1944. As German cities endured devastating aerial bombardment, Allied forces advanced simultaneously from the east and west. In April 1945, Soviet forces entered Berlin. Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker, prompting the German government's immediate surrender. As survivors emerged from the ruins, the nation lay partitioned into Allied occupation zones. Towns lay in rubble. Industrial systems collapsed. and millions were displaced. As concentration camps were liberated and documents revealed the scale of systematic extermination, the regime's crimes became starkly evident. The legacy of totalitarian rule left shame and disbelief in the hearts of those who had lived under it. The autobahns expanded during the Nazi era embodied a progressive nature facilitating rapid troop movement across the empire, while also serving civilian transport. What 1945 left behind was not the regime's promised grandeur, but the complete reckoning of power run amok and ideological collapse. Post-war Germany lay in ruins. Allied bombing had leveled entire city centers, factories lay silent and idle, millions of people scoured the shattered roads seeking food and loved ones. The occupying powers divided Germany into fours under American, British, French and Soviet control. This arrangement was intended as a temporary measure, yet cooperation swiftly gave way to suspicion. Each occupation's own developed under distinct policies. The Western sectors encouraged reconstruction and market reforms, while the Soviets' own prioritized centralized control and land redistribution. Berlin, the once united capital, found itself deeply embedded within the Soviet zone, yet divided among the Allied powers, becoming a microcosm of post-war division. As the Cold War commenced, tensions between former allies grew increasingly acute. In 1949, two independent states emerged. West Germany, officially the Federal Republic of Germany, established a democratic constitution in Bonn, aligning with Western Europe and the United States. East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, emulated the Soviet model, implementing one-party rule and public ownership. The boundary between the two regions gradually hardened into a frontier fortified with watches and barbed wire. Families were forcibly separated, unable to visit freely or even correspond. Berlin, divided yet still connected, became the starkest fissure between opposing ideologies. By 1961, the tide of East Germans fleeing westward in search of better lives had reached an unbearable level. That very night, the East German government responded. A wall was erected in Berlin, a concrete barrier crowned with barbed wire. Streets were severed, railway tracks abruptly ended, and windows overlooking the border were boarded up. Armed guards patrolled the wall, ordered to shoot anyone attempting to cross. For nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall stood not only as a physical barrier, but also as a symbol of the divide between communist rule and the ideals of free democracy. While the East grappled with shortages and state surveillance, West Germany experienced an extraordinary revival dubbed the economic miracle. Aid from the American Marshall Plan, combined with skilled labor and industrial discipline, revived production within years, rebuilt factories, adopted modern techniques, exports surged, and consumer goods returned to shop shelves. Amidst the scarred cityscape, cranes crossed as new buildings rose from the ground. A generation raised amidst ruins found stability through labor. In stark contrast, East Germany's planned economy stifled private enterprise, prioritizing heavy industry over civilian needs. The Ministry for State Security Stasi established one of the world's largest surveillance networks, enforcing political loyalty through threats and covert methods. Despite pervasive fear, many East Germans attempted escape. Some dug through the Berlin Wall, others crafted home-made hot-air balloons, while still others drove vehicles through checkpoints. A few successful escapees became symbols of resistance, while many more were arrested or lost their lives in the attempt. The story spread worldwide, demonstrating that man-made borders cannot extinguish human will. The West chose reconciliation over retribution. West Germany joined NATO and later became a founding member of the European Community. Chancellor Willy Brandt spearheaded the award-winning Ostpolitik policy, seeking to ease tensions through dialogue. His silent kneeling before Warsaw's monument to the fallen in 1970 became an enduring symbol of political humility. By the late 1980s, a wave of transformation swept across the Eastern Bloc. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms championed open dialogue, undermining the foundations of the old order. Protests surged across East Germany as citizens demanded freedom of movement. On 9 November 1989, amid chaotic press conferences, officials abruptly announced the immediate opening of borders. Crowds surged towards checkpoint guards stepped aside as the Berlin Wall was dismantled by citizens acting without orders. That night, Germany's decades-long division began to dissolve as thousands crossed freely for the first time. On 3 October 1990, the two halves of divided Germany formally reunified, becoming a single democratic nation for the first time in nearly half a century. This date became a national holiday, symbolizing reunion rather than conquest. On streets both sides of the Berlin Wall, people waved the same flag. After 40-5 years of separation, East and West Germany established a unified citizenship under the framework of the Federal Republic's Basic Law. The months that followed were marked by both celebration and apprehension. Border checkpoints vanished, yet invisible divides persisted. Habits, institutions and expectations forged by opposing systems would take decades to erode. Unification brought immense economic and social challenges. The West possessed an efficient market economy, modern infrastructure and a robust currency, while the East faced aging factories and widespread unemployment following the collapse of its planned economy. Billions of marks flowed eastward in the form of aid, pensions, and investment subsidies. Roads and railways were rebuilt, residential buildings refurbished, and entire industries privatized or dismantled. Yet this process also delivered a shock to ordinary citizens. Witnessing workplaces questioned their skills declared obsolete. Generations accustomed to secure employment faced competition and uncertainty for the first time. Scholars later termed this emotional reshaping the Second Unification a reconfiguration, not only of territory but of collective consciousness. Berlin's restoration as national capital symbolized revival and rebirth. Throughout the 1990s, cranes dominated the city skyline as the former government quarter underwent transformation. Vacant lots evolving into hubs of academia, commerce, and the arts. The city blended Eastern simplicity with Western creativity, fostering a unique experimental atmosphere that drew global immigrants, entrepreneurs, and artists in droves. By the early 21st century, Berlin no longer symbolized division, but had become a cultural crossroads, shaping Germany's modern identity. The wave of economic modernization extended far beyond the capital. Germany emerged as Europe's foremost industrial and export powerhouse. Its strengths were rooted in automotive engineering, renewable energy, and precision manufacturing. Enterprises successfully transplanted the efficiency and reliability of former heavy industry into emerging fields like green innovation and robotics. The education and technical training system underpinned this transformation, continuously supplying skilled personnel across sectors, keeping Germany's unemployment rate consistently among Europe's lowest. Politically, Germany plays a pivotal role within the European Union. As Europe's engine, it leads continent-wide policies on trade, currency, and environmental standards. When the euro was introduced, its fiscal discipline became a cornerstone of the monetary union. As nations seek Berlin's guidance amid negotiations and crises, leadership concerns have superseded recovery anxieties. Successive governments have maintained prudent diplomatic leadership and domestic deliberation. Chancellor Merkel has long championed pragmatism, balancing economic policy with humanitarian responsibilities. Her measured response during the 2008 global financial crisis stabilized the Eurozone, while her 2015 decision to accept large numbers of refugees signaled a renewed national focus on moral obligations. Throughout these years, Memories of 20th-century dictatorship remain central to civic identity. Commemorative events, educational programs and declassified archives continually reinforce the principle that democracy requires constant maintenance. Transcending politics, post-reunification Germany has become a symbol of stability amid currency turbulence, climate debates and migration pressures. It maintains robust institutions and consensus-based governance. National identity grows increasingly inclusive, linking pride to civic values and technological achievements rather than ethnic lineage. Tradition and new ideas coexist and flourish here. Half-timbered villages and cutting-edge laboratories alike narrate chapters of adaptation to change. Fragments of the Berlin Wall, once a barrier to freedom, now stand as transatlantic memorials. Sections in New York, Tokyo, and the Vatican silently bear witness to a history transcended. Germany's modern narrative is not one of conquering revival, but of enduring reconstruction. This nation remains in the process of rebuilding, shaping Europe's future through the lessons of its fractured past. From fragmented frontier to Europe's heartland, Germany's story is an epic of resilience and transformation. Each era has left its mark upon thought, industry, and identity, forging a nation that continually soothes memory through progress. Here history is not linear, but a rhythm of decline and rebirth, and throughout, the defining truth remains: Germany is not defined by what it conquered, but by what it overcame. Thus this chapter of history gradually merges into the tranquil flow of time. Some riddles remain forever unanswered. Some truths continue to shape our world. Together we traverse the past, grasping its revelations. If you weave this understanding into your daily life, history's echoes shall never fade. Thank you for listening. Until we meet again, may the past remain vivid in your heart.